from various B schools. I welcome all of you. Those who are present today, I'm very sure that they have deep interest in space or defense sector. I personally like to watch a lot of movies in space and defense space, Gravity, Interstellar, Mission Mangal, Border, but never got a chance to interact with people who are actually working in defense sector or a space sector. I have a lot of questions to ask from our esteemed panel members. On this note, I once again welcome all our panelists. Please feel free to ask questions. Please raise your hand. There's an option on your screen. We will unmute you and you can ask a question. And we'll start with the session with our two young entrepreneurs, Srinath from AgniKul, Kris from Kawa Space. What have you up to these days? Are you building an indigenous SpaceX? Over to you, Srinath and Kris. What is AgniKul? What is Kawa? Please help us understand.
Sure, I'll start here. So hi everyone, my name is Srinath. I'm one of the co-founders of this company called AgniKul. So you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Good? Yeah. So at AgniKul, we are building a really small launch vehicle, which is a rocket, which takes about 100 kgs or so to low Earth orbit, which means you're trying to put small satellites in space. That is what you're trying to do by building really small rockets. So why would anyone do this? A lot of small satellites have come out today. Satellites are not as big as they used to be, but rockets are still big, right? So if you actually have to go to space today as a small satellite player, you need to actually do some sort of a ride share, like like taking an Uber to space with multiple other passengers. And of course, there is one big passenger or one big satellite which governs this entire equation. So you're sort of at the mercy of the big satellite player. So when we observe a lot of satellites, getting smaller and smaller, and rockets seem to still be the same size, we thought we could actually shrink the rocket in the size of the rocket to a much smaller level and offer quick on-demand launches. Today, the problem these small guys face is they have to wait for a long time because of ride share to go to space. We want to cut that down completely and give them max 2 to 3 weeks of waiting time before we put them in space. So that's the main mission. We are accomplishing this through multiple strategies. One of them being make the vehicle itself as nimble and as modular as possible. So don't make big engines, instead make small engines. Small engines means you could actually 3D print the whole engine, and that would mean really small time to assemble the whole rocket, and having flexibility in launching from different locations and so on. So that's what we are trying to do at AgniKul. Based out of IIT Madras, about 50 people now, and getting a lot of advice and mentorship from retired ISRO people, from IIT Madras faculty, and so on. So that's what is keeping us going.
Thank you, Srinath. Over to you, Kris. What about Kawa Space?
Right. Kawa is, again, a very small company. We build critical infrastructure space. What we mean by that is that we build the building blocks so that people can actually deploy and use the data from space in a much easier manner. Our customers, we have about 6 products. Our immediate one is a software platform for our enterprise customers, mostly in financial services and strategic risk management. It's a simple drag and drop platform for them to use power, data from about 200, 300 satellites, integrate simply by dragging and dropping into their business analytics system. So the second step is probably to build a bit more into it. Right now, our first step is to build the building blocks so that more and more companies can actually use the power of space.
Okay, interesting. I come to Admiral Shrawat. You have served Indian Navy for many years. Do you think our indigenous defense technology is at par with the international level, or do you think there's a lot to do as of now? What is your opinion? How are these startups, they have started coming up with new technology, defense and space? What is your take on that?
Yeah, thank you, firstly, Varun, for inviting me for this webinar. It's certainly a matter of satisfaction, honor, what do we call it. So now you see your question is a very difficult question to answer. Okay. It can give us, in a way, some dissatisfaction. It can also give us, as an Indian, satisfaction also. You see, when we originally became independent and started things in defense, so there is an organization called Defense R&D Organization, DRDO. It's a very big organization, and a lot of money is spent every year in this organization. It was their responsibility to develop technology. So they will do the R&D, and then we had defense PSUs like HAL, BEL, and MDL. So after developing the technology, then they will give to PSU, they will productionize. So in that model of the whole technology, etc., at that time, private sector was really nascent, was not there. So everything was really government controlled. We have achieved some success in this. Yet we are not at the level of world international armament developer. We are not yet there. Okay. We are able to meet the requirement of defense forces to a certain extent today. Yet there is a significant dependence on import from abroad, okay, which is being attempted to reduce, and it is the ambition of the present government also when they say make in India, Atmanirbhar, they are trying to do it, okay. But this is at the big level. At the smaller MSME level or startup, etc., I would say a lot of things have been done. And I'm personally aware of many small companies who are supplying components, small items, to very big suppliers, defense suppliers in Israel. They're working in the field of microwave, electronics, software, etc., etc. And those items as a system are coming back to India and being imported to other countries also. So this is where we are. So much has been done, but much more needs to be done.
And thanks to people like Vishesh who have found this opportunity to invest in this space. Vishesh, before we ask why did you invest in Kawa or AgniKul, I have a zero level question before I ask the first level question. So zero level is, don't you think it requires deep pockets to be in space and defense sector? When I got to know about your fund, that there's a fund in India which invests in space technology, I was so curious to understand from you, why did you actually pick up space, defense, this space, when there are deep pocket players already available? What was going in your mind?
So I think it takes time to build deep pockets. Having a pocket is a good start, and then you can build depth within the pocket, right? But sort of stepping beyond that, space is interesting. I mean, there's a lot of science around it, and there's also some first principles, common sense around it, right? And whatever I'm going to say is an iterative view that we've built within the organization. So, I don't want to claim to be brilliant or smart enough to have thought this through well ahead. We're fortunate. We've met a lot of entrepreneurs who sort of helped understand and form our own thesis. But the point of why space is interesting or important from a first principles view is that we've all realized in the last 10 to 15 years that there is a lot of value for data. Different people say different things about data. Data is a new oil, data is a new gold, all said and done. And all that data that we're talking about is data that humans are creating on behavior patterns, consumption patterns, on mobile phones, on technology. Largely, the data that's being collected is micro-level data, footprint that you create on the computer, on the cell phone, wherever, right? And we've been doing this for what, 20, 30 years, since when the PC revolution's been up and etc. But there's even more fundamental data that we've been creating as human beings on planet Earth, right? And that data is something that you have to get by zooming out of Earth. Yeah, of course, a drone helps, but a more holistic piece of data is essentially meaning that you have to go outside Earth and observe Earth, which means you need to get beyond the atmosphere and you need to step out to an orbit and go around the Earth and keep watching Earth. And that's when space makes a lot of sense, right? And I'm sort of giving you a common man's view of why space is relevant and important from just my perspective. And then you can sort of slice and dice it in 20 different ways, and you've got upstream, downstream, and you've got a couple of our co-panelists who are both one on the upstream side and the other one on the downstream side. And then you could you can put a lot of business and jargons around it and see. But at a very fundamental level, if you need data on what's going on Earth, of course, you could put a lot of sensors on the soil or wherever and do all that, but that's all super micro data and super complicated to stitch up. If you want to zoom out and you have to get out of the atmosphere, and that's what got us excited.
So as we are talking about data, and last 4 weeks we have been talking about only one thing in India: data. When Jio was able to raise 5 investment rounds, and this gives me another question that we have competition from giants like HAL, BHEL, L&T, Reliance. What's stopping them to hire a team and build something like that, or Kawa Space or AgniKul? Are they complementing the whole industry? So this question is open to Vishesh, you, Srinath, and Kris. What is your take on that? So what is stopping Reliance or an HAL or a BHEL to come up into this space?
You bring an important question. I'm going to give you my perspective, and I'll let the others jump in as well, their views. I think innovation can happen anywhere and everywhere, right? What's important is what sort of skin in the game and motivation you have. And of course, there's a lot of thesis, philosophy, and literature that's been written around why small teams and young teams, not within large organizations, sometimes are able to innovate faster or differently from within the large organization. Sometimes large organizations could carry historical bias that sort of prevents them from sort of experimenting in newer directions. But that said, all the names that you mentioned are very credible people, and they're quite capable technically, from deep pocket standpoint, financially, to be able to do it. And it would be interesting to see what plays out. Though I do think that the two gentlemen on this conference are very complementary in nature to what they could do with some of the names that you've mentioned. And I think there's potential for them to complement and not necessarily compete.
Okay. Srinath and Kris, did you ever think that will there be a competition from players like Reliance or HAL in your space?
Sure. I mean, it's always good to have some sort of competition that will push companies like all of us to listen more closely to the customer, right? You cannot create a company in isolation. I have a massive respect for all the names you mentioned. They have been contributing to the space ecosystem and the defense ecosystem for probably 50 years now, and ever since the Indian civil space program started, and then moving on to the defense research program as well. They're doing exceptional job in meeting the requirement of our agencies, especially for the government. I see them as collaborators in the traditional players. They have a way of looking at things, and they are extremely reliable partner to execute certain things. For companies like ours, whether it's Kawa Space Systems, or I'm sure with the launch providers, let's say AgniKul, it's about time we go and ask them to share the same expertise with us and build for us, so that we can actually grow together rather than competing. Competing is not really an ideal way to build a company. We have a certain unique customer insight, and that's why we are taking this path. And whenever possible, we use all the companies you mentioned to help us create that particular mission, right? And some part of it, they would like to do it themselves. Some we will probably outsource some of our work to them. It's a hard industry. We can actually use all kind of help we get, whether it's the Indian larger companies or global companies. Our supply base is growing, so we use a lot of European manufacturers. Slowly, we will move into the capable Indian manufacturers as well.
Okay, and Srinath, what about you? You find them as competition?
No, definitely not. I don't think so. In fact, I think it's the other way around, and Kris summarized it well in some aspects, right? Using facilities of some of these people is something that we're already, trying to do. Like for example, if you, for a launch vehicle company, if you want to actually do wind tunnel testing at a large scale, then you'd probably be using facilities from NAL, right? So, and similarly, there are other things where they're like for a thermovac chamber or something, some of these facilities already have it. So as a small company to start with, instead of leveraging all of this knowledge and, getting from that starting point, if you want to build everything again from scratch and look at it as competition, I don't think that's the best move in terms of strategy. So yeah, I actually see this as more, all of these companies can come together, and I think that some of the paths will be smaller than the whole that will come out of it. So I think that's how it's going to be. I don't see it as a competition.
Sure. Mr. Shrawat, you were posted at ISRO briefly. You mentioned before we started the panel. So did you, when you were posted at ISRO, did you get a chance to speak to your fellow colleagues that there should be some SMEs or startups or new entrepreneurs should come up with new technology, because ISRO will need fresh blood to pick up the space program? I just want to understand what kind of discussions you used to have internally over the coffee table at ISRO.
Yeah, you see, I think it was many years back, but there has always been a desire to bring in youngsters into development of state-of-the-art technology in any field, actually. So, but at that time, this kind of entrepreneurship atmosphere was not in the country. So they were, at that time, the thought process was to induct new blood and see how we best utilize them for different sectors. But I can tell you today, in the sense of the government, in this regard, and I tell you because as I was in CMD Mazicon Talk, the government was always saying the big players like you name HAL, BEL, we should become the system integrators, the platform integrators. Let the subsystem be developed by the private sector. So there is a huge today policy from the government side also, and by the big players also, that they should become the big players, the system integrators, let the smaller equipment come from the industry. So this is a method of even involving the private sector into the government procurements and government developmental work, which is happening today. So in fact, I would like to fully agree with what other my co-panelists have said. There is no competition as such. Bigger players like to leverage the capabilities of smaller players. It becomes more cost effective for them. It has to be a win-win situation for both sides. And I think it is happening today. So it is, I think we are moving in a good direction. Of course, there could always be elements of some frustration or some surprises, but by and large, I think it is happening in this manner.
Sure. Vishesh, you must be receiving many applications for investment once you would have announced your investment in AgniKul or Kawa. So are you still receiving applications in space and defense technology from different startups, or do you think these two companies were one of two of those companies where you found them as a gem? But how is the market from the startup space is shaping up now? Are there too many startups coming up, or they are not?
A few points to be made, right? One, firstly, we're a deep science and technology fund, and space is one of the many things we do. Having said that, we've done 3 investments in space after having looked at about 40 companies. And yes, since we've already invested in these companies, we do think they're gems. But that said, I think there's a lot of innovation that different folks are trying to do, different parts. About 3 weeks ago, I had a call with somebody who has a plan to do in-space robotics, and that's at the next level of saying that you don't need to take things from here, we'll go make things there. Right? So I think there are different people trying to solve for different things. I think the latest number is there are possibly about 40 plus companies operating within the space and defense gamut. 40 young startups trying to do that. So I think the opportunity is wide open there, and there are 2 or 3 players going after each segment, and hence it's sort of broad. It's not very fragmented, as we see.
So the old saying of getting our brains drained is actually reversing, right?
Yeah, it's a good thing. I think people are realizing that there is a reasonable amount of fertility in our environment to churn out great companies and great technologies in India. And yeah, we've got some of the brightest mind on this call as well, and they're all working on some very exciting things.
So as we speak today, SpaceX is planning for the round 2 of the launch of human beings, right? So Kris,
Yeah, fingers crossed.
fingers crossed. Yeah, I personally feel that it should happen because it is good for overall industry, right? So Kris and Srinath, you are Indian company, right? Are you planning to restrict your offerings to India as a market, or you're trying to do build international market for you as well?
So I think this is a global market for everyone. Space is to some extent without boundaries, right? Where do you draw the lines if you have to? So yeah, of course, there is another angle to it as well from a strategic standpoint. But overall, I think we definitely are going behind a global market. In fact, a lot of small satellite companies that who are going to be our customers are based out of Europe and the US. And of course, there's a fair bit in Japan as well. So I think, yeah, definitely it's a global thing and not restricted to India alone. It's like any other business. You're a transportation company. A lot of people outside of the country wanting to go take themselves from point A to point B, and we'll help them out. That's it. I don't see it as anything different.
So I'm sure you would have seen one old picture when I think the first satellite was launched. It was transported from one point to another point over a bullock cart, right? So we have moved away from that that scene. Kris, are you also planning to?
I've, by the way, heard that is for vibration testing as well. It was not exactly a cost thing, but yeah, sure, yeah, we have moved away from that definitely.
Kris, you're also planning to move out of India as well? Not as in we won't let you go out, but I mean.
Please let me go out. But
Okay.
Jokes apart, 80% of our customers are global, right? Like, so our flagship product, the Kawa cloud platform, about 85% of our customers are global. Our focus industries are strategic risk and financial services. We are lucky to have some of the forward-thinking companies with a new set of DNA, the engineering and data-driven DNA, using it from the day one. And these companies are most of the customers are in the 5 financial centers in the world, whether it's like Hong Kong, London, New York, and the other emerging ones. We do plan to have our forward deployed engineers in these locations. Right now, most of things are served through an Indian office here, but a platform like this, right? You can literally walk into the website and sign up and integrate into your core business platform. So for a company like ours, like I said, most of our customer base are global.
Sure. Before we move forward, we received a question from our one of the participants. Manan, can you please unmute Joy Nikop? We have a question from Joy. Yeah. Joy, please ask your question. Okay, I think we lost Joy there. But moving forward, Vishesh, Kris and Srinath. So I'm sure Vishesh, when he was putting money, so he would have one apprehension in his mind that this is a space where a lot of government approvals are required, right? How did you manage to resolve that, or it was not as such a problem, or a did you face a red tapeism? How did you manage to pass on those approval cycle? Vishesh, would you like?
Yeah, okay. So I thought you were asking them. So I think, we have a very philosophical view as far as regulation is concerned. If you're investing in sectors and ideas that are already there for 10, 15 years, then regulation is going to be very clear on what can and can't be done. And there will be other sectors that are a little more forward-looking, where the innovation curve leads forward. And in those cases, in most geographies, not restricting to India, regulation follows innovation. And I think the philosophical view I personally have to it, as long as it's good innovation and is going the right direction, at the right time, the regulation will open in the right way. So I don't want to beat myself too much about whether, when will regulation open, when can we do what we can do. I think it's all incremental over a period of time as companies and startups and private participation show progress and maturity in space and in defense. I would like to believe that the government will at the right time open out the right policies. If one were to wait for policies to lead innovation, that's one way of doing business, nothing right or wrong about it. But I think in certain sectors like this, it will recalibrate itself over time.
Okay, Mr. Shrawat, you would have heard, so what people are saying, a few things, the policy change which happened during Corona time is actually is good, right? So we opened defense 74%, and then we opened up for space as well for private players. So since we are opening up, is your company also planning to invest in new technology or so you are in a very niche sector, submarines and torpedoes. So, but do you also see some new startups if building energy from ocean waves or something? Do you think your company will be willing to take part in such startup race now in India?
So, yeah, I think the policy changes which have been brought about in the area of defense, it is more about, let us say, the FDI norms have been eased. So now greater, I think 70+% is now permitted in this sector. I would say even then, even today, the foreign investors are still skeptical of investing. There's a huge issue of IPR, which is to be addressed properly. So one is the investment, which is a financial investment, but then the issue comes of IPR, which also is yet to be addressed fully by the companies. So, but I would like to address in a different manner that you see these norms which have come about have got all in defense particularly. Every policy has got a different meaning for big players and different meaning for smaller startups. Okay. These policies have a direct bearing with the major players. Mm-hmm. But if you ask me what's the message for startups, smaller companies, SMEs, etc., then it really doesn't matter. It didn't matter. I would reckon, and that's how it is happening in space as we have seen, that the smaller companies, smaller investors should try to become tier 2 or tier 3 suppliers to big players, rather than dealing with defense services directly. Now, you use this term, deep pockets, yes, in defense, you require deep pockets, but there's another factor. You have to have unlimited patience to deal with defense.
Very well said, sir. Very well said.
There's unlimited patience you require. And it is a myriad system. Defense is very, very complex. So there are innumerable agencies dealing with the same issue. A small person finds it very difficult to deal with such situations. So it is better that you deal with bigger players and try to become tier 2 or tier 3 suppliers. And for that, there's a great opportunity today because it is government wish, as I was saying, to bring in more private sector, even through public sector. So public sector becomes the big brother, private sector becomes the smaller brother, younger brother. There are different processes are there. I would like to say that those who are want to deal in defense, the first thing they should do is get this registered with some big suppliers, which is also a long process. But if you get registered in even one public sector company and specifying the areas in which you want to deal with, it becomes incumbent on that organization to call you for any time when such a procurement is taking place. So whereas people talk about bureaucracy, etc., yes, it is there, and yet there is a system in this madness. There is a system in this madness in public procurements for all big defense companies, which today are looking for smaller players to increase their VOP, I would say, value production. Well, VOP can only bring up not by investing in their own infrastructure, by bringing more and more smaller people into their fold and then increasing their yearly capacity. So this is the message I would like to give. This is what is happening today. There's a great opportunity, but built not directly, but as a tier 2, tier 3 supplier.
Okay, sure. So exciting time ahead for SMEs, MSMEs.
Yes.
Over that note, we have few questions from the attendees now. Manan, can you please unmute Ameya? So we have a question from Ameya.
Hey, maybe you want to just read out the questions because I think these people have already typed down the questions.
Sure. So the question is, if DARPA can be called DRDO counterpart in the US, why does it seem that DARPA has outperformed DRDO and its tech seems to have percolated in Silicon Valley? Example, Apple, which has given rise to an indigenous hardware industry. So what I think the question is, why DRDO is not up to the mark in comparison to the other agencies? So who can pick up this question?
Maybe I'll answer because it is, I think, more defense oriented.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, the DARPA is the agency of the United States.
Yeah.
Dealing with the development of new technology, and then when they, so they are a very big organization, and in our side we have got a defense R&D organization about which I was talking about. I think you see it is just a difference that US is different from India. So I think the question or the comparison 1-to-1 does not really apply. We have got see, it is easy to criticize our own R&D scientists. And I'm saying is. But we have come, I would say, whereas we have come a long way, we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go. And within DRDO, a lot of new things are happening, changes are taking place. And there again, there was a time when DRDO was trying to develop everything on their own. And they could never do it. So then there's a big change in their philosophy itself that again, they should become the system developers and not the component developers. And that component we developed, you can even import. Because even in the US, what if they produce a system, every component is not made in the US. It is largely imported. So that change has also come. There was a time when DRDO was trying to develop every component. But that they have to change that. If we can see our success stories, our LCA program is a success story. Which is now being inducted gradually in the course. It is to the credit of DRDO. So whereas a person, our countryman can feel dissatisfied by DRDO has not done it, and as a countryman he is quite entitled to remain dissatisfied because it is his money that is being spent by DRDO. Fair enough, but we have to give some credit to these people also. They are working under a lot of constraints they want.
Sure.
But other matters, if they like to add something, and in my opinion, maybe they can add a few things in my assessment.
Sure. Next question is from Divakar. I believe this question should go to Kris and Srinath both. So question is, how are you managing licensing and acquiring intellectual property, considering that these are owned by institutions in the developed countries?
What do you mean by intellectual property?
So the technology you are building, so you might be using some.
Build it, right? Why we need to kind of one way to kind of build an organization which traditionally most of the traditional players have done is to go out, partner with a R&D division or a corporation globally to acquire whatever R&D they have done and try to replicate the manufacturing process here and distribute that thing to their target customers. What younger companies like us, we are doing is that we are building our tech ground up.
2 minutes. 2 minutes.
So I don't think, of course, there are a lot of dependencies on we choose to, for example, we design our systems and when it comes to manufacturing, one day we outsource it to a capable player, right? It can be a global player or an Indian player, doesn't matter. But when it comes to core technology, these startups, including mine and everybody pretty much in the space industry here in today, it's all designed in our cheap IKEA tables, right? It is not really, we are not in the market to per se, buy it from a global player. I think that is what probably makes startups much better, cooler, because our job is to invent a new reality, a new solution, and then ask for help in manufacturing and pay them as well. Not that we are asking for free stuff. I think that is what that's my opinion.
Sure. Diwakar, does that answer the question? I think you came on board. Probably you wanted to ask a follow-up question.
No, I think that sort of answers my question.
Okay, sure.
Thanks, Kris.
Okay. We have a next question. I think it should be answered by Vishesh. How does somebody who's not from the space sector find opportunities and get involved? So I think Balkrishna Agarwal maybe is asking this question from the investor side.
I'm still figuring it out myself, but I think that question is better suited for Kris and Shri, because I think maybe one of you want to talk a little bit about the that closed association that's being formed that sort of has these 30, 40 different companies trying to participate and talk about it. You guys may know better. Kris, do you want to talk about that?
Okay. Are there private HNI investors also? Do you see those people will also be participating, or only the institutional funds will be the one who will come forward as of now?
In the startup investments?
For startup investments.
It's anybody's guess. It's a question of risk appetite in the world, right? I mean, if there's an HNI who understands the space or has the appetite for the risk reward situation, you might find someone coming in. The larger question is, what sort of investors do you want to be attracting as a startup? I mean, if capital is available and in abundance, then I think it's ideal for a founder or an entrepreneur to pick an investor who understands the risk and the journey and sort of comes along with it, as against someone who's opportunistically putting money on something that looks good.
Sure. Joy Nikob has pinged me again I missed asking Joy's question. So what ensures success of Indian space tech startups when big companies like SpaceX?
I've seen that question. I don't think there's any surety or guarantee of success in any which way. What's important to realize is that Elon Musk has taken a particular strategy and a particular approach of first going vertical and then building horizontal.
Yeah.
And since he's leading the way, he's going to be looking to optimize efficiencies of scale. And there is going to be a huge opportunity beyond that for other players to build and play around, like what AgniKul is doing. While it's also a launch company, it does not compete with SpaceX. There is a very different category that it addresses to. Similarly for Kawa as well. I think it's not one size fits all, though if it's the only size available, everybody is going to go and buy that. But over time, you will have other sizes and people will go and sort of buy what fits them best.
And what are the exit opportunities, Vishesh, do you see for yourself as a VC fund in this space?
So I think at this point in time, it's a lot of imagination, right? I mean, we haven't seen 20 different exits of space tech companies in India yet, and hopefully you will in the next few years. But if I were to take a good guess on what's possible, I think there could be one of two outcomes. One, the journey itself may be long, in which case funds like us may end up selling to other larger investors, financial investors over a period of time. I mean, if it's a 15-year journey for someone to sort of see an IPO, then a venture fund may not have that time frame, and at some point of time, may sell to a later round of investor. But I think if I were to take a good guess, there could also be interesting M&A opportunities coming up along the side where, data companies or analytics companies, just the big tech will start seeing that this sort of data is very valuable and they may start wanting to come into it. Yeah, so I think I would put a 70-30, 70 M&A, 30 exit of financial investors. Okay. And a lot of these companies in the medium to long run will be extremely profitable. So I will not rule out a listing for them, though it's less likely that in my lifetime as a venture fund in those companies, we may be there for an IPO. But some of them in the long run are very profitable companies and hence could be great listing ideas as well.
No, but startup IPO or SME IPO is what Madam Finance Minister talked about in this in this week, last week only, right? So we may.
I don't know enough to comment on that, quite honestly. I think what I have seen is some of the larger ones in markets where there's more liquidity and markets where there's more understanding of what long-term plays are, and I'm sure some of these companies in the next 10 to 15 years may be great candidates for that.
Sure. I think we have a lot of questions for Vishesh. Next question looks like is also should be answered by you only, Vishesh. Aftab has a question: how does the valuation of space tech work? In non-space tech startups, total addressable market works as a key criteria for valuation. Now, how does that differ from space tech? Because I think we don't have a legacy. That's the reason this question is asked.
Well, I think the whole market opportunity, market assessment is not very different for space versus non-space. What's also interesting, at least from the stage we operate, and just to sort of be very clear, we're a seed fund, we invest very early on. We're usually the first investor. So oftentimes there's not a lot of empirical data that guides a lot of our decisions. And oftentimes valuation is more art than science. And I think one of the metrics that we sort of think through is, hey, what is the round size? What is the milestone you're going to get to? How much capital do you need over a period of time so that the dilution at the founder level sort of is meaningful over a period of time. And then we sort of factor all of that and take a price.
Okay, sure. Srinath, how do you, at your organization, how do you ensure the productivity? So do you just use empirical studies again? So Vishesh answered this question from the valuation standpoint. There was no legacy. Similarly, in your business also, we're doing it for the first time, right? So how do you ensure the productivity, the output is desired as per your expectations?
So actually, in this, it is not being done as a private industry so much, but rockets have been built and have flown, right? So there are very well-defined technological benchmarks in terms of what it means for achievement, right? So for example, if you've done a rocket engine firing, you know that you are this much % done, and there is a criteria for measurement of success there. So that is one measure of productivity for us. And of course, there are other startups which are not doing exactly the same thing, but something similar. And we also see how their journey has been, starting from SpaceX itself when they were a much smaller company and what they were doing, to other companies as well, like Rocket Labs today, which is a more comparable story for us, right? We see what they've done. We see how each of those moments for them contributed to their actual first orbital launch and so on. So there are actually clear benchmarks. It doesn't seem to me like that also has to be figured out. The benchmarks are pretty clear actually for productivity.
Sure. Kris, we have many students from different B schools in this panel today, so as part of the attendees. And we will also be sharing our notes with the B school as part of our collaboration with them. Mostly the professors at B schools asked us to ask for a key learning for their students. So do you have some message for the students? How do they shape up their career if they want to enter into this space?
Well, I think so most of the time, if they're just getting out of grad school, the best way still is basically jump into opportunities, anything, don't look at brand names, this, that, industries, whatever they feel like. Go to a job if they're pursuing jobs. Go to a job where you are pushed to the limits in whatever way, so that first 10 years of till 30, you can actually play around. Literally go make things inside those organizations or independent. It doesn't matter whether you're working in a let's say sales function or a marketing function or an engineering manager function. It doesn't matter. Try to be a principal, not an agent, right? Try to be. It's if you're looking for a 9-to-5 job, please don't join a startup, right? This is going to be extremely heart crushing. I think my team, without telling them, they're pretty much always working. It is my partner and I, we make sure that we are there for them all the time. It is not don't look at it from a job, right? Don't look at it from a career. Just go to any place where they let you make things, whether it's small, big, doesn't matter. If you're not doing things with your hand metaphorically in today's world, don't take that job. You don't want to be a manager. You don't want to be a person who doesn't know how to do the bare basic minimum things, right? focus on that. I think whether you're coming to space or not, doesn't matter. Like, you want to work in more services industries, it's fine, right? Space is hard. Please, please don't come if you are really not in it for 20, 30, 40 years and nobody will get any recognition. It's a hard life as a founder, as an employee, as everyone. So if you want like a sexy job, please don't come here. If you want to impress your parents, please don't come here. And if you really, really deeply believe that you will make things one day, maybe join a startup.
What you're saying is, Houston, the silence in space is deafening.
Right. The space as well as in startups, nobody has time to hear you scream. And it is going to be extremely difficult. It is going to be super rewarding if you zoom out and look at it from a philosophical point of view. But your day-to-day life is going to be hell.
Okay. Okay, I'll still take that as a compliment for our next generation, by the way. So Vishesh and Mr. Shrawat, this question is for you. So we have Space F, there are incubators outside India, Space F, Astropreneurs, there are so many incubators. Do you think India should also have its own indigenous incubator and companies like Mr. Shrawat is working with? And there are so many defense companies in India. Mr. Shrawat knows probably so many companies. So these companies can actually bless them. And I think ISRO also have some incubation program I read somewhere. So this question is to both of you, Mr. Shrawat and Vishesh. Do you think we should have, and Special Invest can actually spearhead that, you being the leader in space investment in India? No one has.
I will answer later, yeah.
Sorry, sir.
I'll answer later. Let me hear Vishesh.
Sure. Please.
So you're being kind to us by saying what you're saying. I think it's still very early days. We don't know who's going to sort of lead or lag. To wait and see. I think for now we're just happy we're working with exciting founders. I think you touched upon an interesting thing, and it's I see the need in sort of two ways. One, I think it will be extremely useful to have an organization, whether it's an incubator or accelerator or whatever it be, that allows for access to platforms for testing, for access to platforms for experimentation, and for access to more patient innovation capital. Oftentimes, we have pockets that are not deep and large, and hence, having access to capital that values innovation, factoring, of course, the risk and sort of is long-termish in nature, I think can immensely help companies. Of course, companies in the space sector and companies beyond the space sector as well. If there is some way to sort of create capacity for experimentation, testing, and early prototyping for some of these companies, I think it will be very valuable. I'm more a recipient here, and if it does, then a lot of these guys will benefit immensely, and we'll have to see and find ways to do it. I'm sure there are a lot of seasoned people like Sir Rahul on the call who can sort of help us directionalize some of that.
And Mr. Shrawat, over to you. So your group, do you think will be interesting to help Vishesh in setting up an incubator?
Yeah, okay. So, now I like to answer in different manners. You see, today, in my knowledge, what is happening is such a thing is happening through educational institutions. So, like I think, was it Sri who said that he's working outside the campus of IIT Chennai somewhere. So, the government is trying to do in this manner. You see, the moment if the government is directly funding something, you can imagine there are only going to be rules and regulations and bureaucracy. What have you done? Who has got approved it? All that. It doesn't work in our system. The government is spending some money. Then you can imagine it will only be more bureaucracy and less results. So that system will never work. And there will always be an auditor, will always be a finance man, and he will not be interested in anything else except his own philosophy that he has. So direct funding like this is not a successful model. Having said that, I think what government is trying to do is to support this ecosystem through the educational institutions. I think they are giving money also to educational institutions, to IIMs. Even ISB has such a setup, and IIT has got. So these are the methods which they are adopting. At the same time, like Vishesh said, that government is also telling the agencies to provide the testing facilities which are owned by the government free of cost to entrepreneurs, to startups and private sector, which is a government order that such facilities should be given by and large to private sector free of cost, which is also, I think, big facility, because those infrastructure require huge investment if somebody has to spend money in the testing facilities. And now coming to my own company, my own role is actually indigenization for the submarine program. And I can take a lot of pride in saying that my predecessor, this company, have supplied for the submarine program items worth almost 1,000 crore plus for the submarine program. But it has been a very tedious process. And I said, dealing in defense is extremely difficult. Another problem I just briefly touch is about orders. A lot of people are willing to invest their energies, money, everything, but finally you should get an order. And getting order is very, very difficult, because firstly, sometimes the money is not there. Sometimes they say, what experience you have? If you don't have experience, I can't place an order on you. And therefore, it is chicken story. But these are the kind of things which the government is trying to address, and have an ecosystem which addresses even this issue, and to say, if your order value is below certain thing, then don't insist on previous experience or having delivered something. So these are the kind of things which are happening slow, but I think this is how our country works. Our country does not work like China, unfortunately. We work like India only.
We actually
or fortunately, we could say both. Yes.
Whatever we say.
Yeah, but I think, Varun, what's important to note is, I think this is activities like this are heavy on the research and heavy on the academic front, and hence it's better to sort of have research organizations and institutions lead it than a private party lead it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? That's important, because I think it has to be viewed with building intellectual capability in the country and not necessarily viewed with purely a commercial view to it.
True, exactly.
That's the key part here, and I think like Mr. Shrawat mentioned, NCCRD out of IIT Madras is one such good step, and I'm sure hopefully there'll be an NCCRD too, and a few more in other parts of the country as well.
Sure.
The other piece that will also be valuable is sort of, again, building on this whole indigenous part, and is to try and see if some of these larger existing incumbents or larger players can find ways to become customers of some of the smaller companies that are building innovative tech.
Sure.
And we have to sort of support each other and grow and build on top of it. It doesn't necessarily have to be under a brand of an incubator or an accelerator, but as long as everybody walks away with the idea to sort of focus on indigenization and help grow from within, I think it's a great idea.
Wonderful. So we are running short of time. One last question I'll ask Srinath and Kris, since Vishesh and Admiral Shrawat mentioned about China. So this gave me a reason to ask this question. Srinath and Kris, how much dependency do we have on China now on your business? This is the last question, and we'll close for the day.
Yeah, Kris, want to go?
Yes, Kris, please go ahead. How much dependency do we have on China now, or are we Atmanirbhar?
We, as in our independent companies?
Yes, your company, yes.
We have very little, zero dependency on China. And pretty much at this stage, none of the startups, pretty much everything we are building, and I'm sure our industry colleagues also, startups building, it's all their stuff. And I don't think, at our stage, like, we don't have anything.
Sure. Srinath, what about your company?
Yeah, same. Hardly any dependency, nothing. Yeah. I mean, ISRO has done a lot of launch vehicle stuff internally, and Anyway, even if we have to go outside for a little bit, there is some reliance on probably Europe, but very, very little outside of India.
So we are totally.
There is zero dependence on China between both these companies and most of the companies.
This is actually great news. So on that note, I would like to thank all of you again, Admiral Shrawat, Vishesh, Srinath, and Kris. Unless you have to say you want to pass on any message to our participants, otherwise we can close the session.
I think it's been fine, a pleasure to interact with the audience and be a co-panelist with so many distinguished countrymen, youngsters. They are the shining star of the country. And I take satisfaction that the next generation is doing well, and I think our country is in safe hands. In fact, I would like to say that there was a lady saying that American defense industry, almost 60% is dependent on China, Chinese components. I think it is not the case with India. It is a great satisfaction.
Yes. Vishesh, you want to share some message?
Thank you very much. I enjoyed being in this panel.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you, Srinath, Kris, Vishesh, Admiral Shrawat. Thank you, Manan, for organizing this. Thank you, every participant of this session. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you.